Scooby-Doo has been on the air for well over half a century, and throughout its dozens of TV shows and movies, the franchise has mostly stuck to the same formula. Some old guy repurposes some old costume from his sexy roleplay days to pull off a real estate or insurance scam, but is foiled by a talking dog and a bunch of meddling kids, always played by clearly 20-something-year-olds in the live-action movies.
Are you okay?
I'm good.
But the key word there is mostly, which can be a pretty scary word. It's like if someone told you, hey, that burger you're eating is mostly beef, or if your doctor said, your brain is mostly flesh-eating bacteria free. It would naturally worry you. And it should worry you in Scooby-Doo's case, which, yes, mostly stayed faithful to its classic formula. But the few times it didn't, it ventured straight into full-blown horror territory. So let's take a look at the bonkers, the embarrassing, the unbelievable examples of Scooby-Doo trying to make its audience drop a Scooby-Dookie in their pants. We're talking about sacrificing humans to cat gods, Cronenbergian horrors almost destroying the planet, and just so much dog incest. This is CanonBall. Number 5, the Scooby Apocalypse comic. Scooby Apocalypse is a comic first released in 2016, which reimagines the franchise in a post-apocalyptic setting. In this universe, Velma and her brothers created nanobots that were supposed to infect all of humanity and purge all of our worst qualities, like greed, violence, and that thing where someone sends a ton of short, choppy texts instead of just one coherent sentence. What is up with that? Anyway, Velma's bros modify the nanites' code to be able to secretly control humans. She tries to stop them, something goes wrong, and the nanites end up mutating people into cannibalistic monsters that would instantly have Cronenberg reaching for the lotion. From there, the comic becomes your standard zombie survival story, only featuring the Scooby Gang in brand new roles. Shaggy, for example, is now a surprisingly handsome dog trainer. Scooby is the result of an experiment to raise dogs' intelligence and turn them into weapons. And it worked, as evidenced by a scene of Scoob ripping out a mutant's throat with his teeth. Some of the creepiest highlights of the comic include an insane mutant who thinks he's a doctor and tortures people with surgical instruments that he keeps stabbed in his arm. There's also the story of the mutants building a statue to Velma's brother Rufus, the main person responsible for the nanite outbreak. He goes insane, tries to be the mutant's god, but ends up placed inside his own statue in Wicker Man. There's also some non-gory yet still very disturbing stuff in the comic, like Fred getting zombified and Daphne considering suicide in order to escape the Fredless hell that the world has become. The comic definitely tried to be too edgy sometimes, but when it came to the monster designs and some character moments, it created some pretty good horror material, which is doubly impressive considering that it all had to star the characters from Scooby-Doo. Number 4, Scooby-Doo romances his cousin. In the 1976 to 1978 The Scooby-Doo Show, Scoob was paired up with his dim-witted cousin, Scooby-Dumb, a caricature of a southern hick with a slow drawl and a jaw more slack than his stance on the issue of dating cousins. Now, that's not an insult against the character. I mean, it is, but it's also the summary of the episode, The Chiller Diller Movie Thriller. The episode starts with Doo's and Dumb's cousin, Scooby-D, playing the lead role in a remake of an old silent film. Because I guess in this world, talking dogs are normal and recognized as a sentient species.
Whatever y'all say.
Does that mean there are human dog couples in this world? No, that's too disturbing to think about. Let's just stick to the less creepy topic of dog incest.
Would you do it for a Scooby-Doo kiss, huh? Oh boy, you bet.
So, during the shoot, Scooby-Dumb gets confused and attacks the actor playing the villain to save Scooby-D.
It's you!
Yes.
And what does Dee do when two of her family members mess with her job and threaten her livelihood? She plants 2 kisses on both of them. It was on the cheek, so nothing too icky. But both Doo and Dumb react to it with cartoon hearts swirling all around them, turning redder than the rockets they must have been sporting below the screen. There's also the matter of Dee herself, who talks with a Southern Belle voice
Oh, my hero.
to add a little extra implication that the Scoob family tree is a telephone pole. I could go deeper into the plot of the episode, but honestly, you already know how it goes. There's a guy pretending to be a monster, Velma discovers a clue that cracks the case, and the guy is eventually caught. But the episode could have featured a photorealistic decapitation, and the creepiest thing about it would still be the Rudy Giulianification of Scooby-Doo. Number 3, The Doll Factory from Hell. In 2010, Scooby-Doo was rebooted in the series Mystery Incorporated, which stuck its tongue in its cheek so many times, it almost burrowed through it to the other side.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Because you're old!
The show is essentially a mix of self-aware parody and semi-serious homages to famous horror stories and conspiracy theories.
Sounds kind of old school.
So in one episode, you may have the gang chasing a monster to the old haunted toy factory, to which Daphne asks,
Didn't they turn this place into an orphanage?
and then Fred replies,
You're thinking of the old haunted orphanage across the street.
At the same time, the show's second season had a season-spanning arc about Sumerian mythology, the theory of humans descending from ancient alien astronauts, and the possible destruction and rebirth of Earth by the mysterious planet Nibiru that a lot of people actually believe in. Add to it comedic breaks like cameo appearances of other Hanna-Barbera properties, Blue Falcon, for example, here reinvented as a parody of Frank Miller's gritty, ultra-violent Batman.
We're Mystery Incorporated.
Corporate greed is another symptom of a society rotting from the inside out.
This gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of show you're dealing with. But in the season 2 episode, The Wrath of Krampus, the series uses that false sense of security to mysteriously incorporate urine into your boxer briefs.
He's peeing on me.
The episode, as you may have guessed, deals with the mythological Krampus, the Joker to Santa Claus's Batman. The Krampus is introduced as a punisher of bad kids who goes around scaring them until their hair turns white. His design is a bit creepy, but there's nothing especially disturbing about the episode, until Krampy kidnaps a girl and carries her off to the aforementioned haunted toy factory. And you think you know what to expect. It'll probably be an homage to some old horror movie. But, like the rest of the show, it'll ultimately be played for laughs, right? Well, that depends. Were you a good boy or girl this year? Just kidding, it doesn't matter. Here's your sanity-shattering doll factory from hell. The first shot of the factory is a bunch of weirdly realistic toddler dolls with empty black eyes hanging from the ceiling, and it somehow gets worse from there. In the next shots, through perspective tricks, the dolls briefly appear gigantic, big enough to eat an actual toddler, which you know they would if given a chance. Also, they all seem to be covered in a red substance that is probably meant to be rust instead of blood. You know how old plastic dolls develop rust. All that's missing is for the dolls to start moving on their own and calling you Mama!
Mama.
Ultimately, the Krampus ends up trapped in a giant bin full of eyeless, blood-covered baby doll heads. And the only reason it didn't start leaking from every orifice out of the sheer horror of the whole situation was because, spoiler alert, the Krampus turned out to be
Charlie the Haunted Robot!
You'll need to watch the show to get more context for that, because the longer I talk about this episode, the more I'll have to drink to purge the images of dolls from my mind. I'm just kidding, I know they'll never leave. Or stop telling me to
cleanse the unfaithful.
Number 2, Scrappy-Doo's bad acid trip transformation. There's a persistent rumor going around that Tim Curry, supposedly a lifelong Scooby-Doo fan,
and he's revealed as a warlock,
was offered the role of the villain in the first live-action movie, but declined after learning that the film would include Scrappy-Doo, whom he hated for some reason. This has made the rounds online so many times that James Gunn, the 2002 film's writer, had to chime in and explain that, quote, Tim Curry was a 23-year-old man when Scooby-Doo debuted in 1969, and a 33-year-old man when Scrappy-Doo debuted in 1979. But there actually was someone attached to the movie who hated Scooby's puppy nephew. James Gunn himself. In the same Twitter thread where he debunked the Tim Curry story, Gunn was asked what he thought about Scrappy, to which he said, quote, I think it would be apparent from the movie that I'm not the biggest fan. Yeah, it really would. The very first time Scrappy appears on screen in the live-action film,
He's peeing on me.
the dialogue establishes that he does this a lot to mark his territory, and essentially call dibs on Daphne. Once you introduce a character in a urine-soaked scene with implied bestiality,
You don't have the scrote for this job, Pally!
you should never have to answer questions about whether you like said character or not. Even putting the pee scene aside, the 2002 Scooby-Doo movie was very different from the cartoon.
The creatures must need our bodies.
Word. Like how it subtly acknowledged that Shaggy might occasionally smoke the old electric lettuce.
I'm Mary Jane.
Like that is my favorite name.
And oh yeah, in the movie, ghosts and monsters are real. The antagonists in this movie aren't old men in rubber masks, but actual demons who steal souls in order to perform the Darkopolis ritual that would allow them to rule the world. But there actually is a non-ghost mastermind behind all this. Old man? Scrappy? Yeah, James Gunn decided to make Scooby and Scrappy one of the most f***ed up uncle-nephew duos in pop culture history, second only to LMFAO. He turned Scrappy into the movie's main villain and, of course, the stuff of pure nightmares. After being unmasked, Scrappy reveals that he's absorbed enough human souls to transform himself into, I guess, Shaggy's sleep paralysis demon after his dealer sold him weed laced with Gary Busey's spinal fluid. Disturbing doesn't even begin to describe Scrappy's monster transformation. The way his body bulges out and expands looks like some kind of growing, mutated tumor from a Resident Evil knockoff. He looks like a CPR dummy made out of expired meat that someone put together drunk. His head looks like someone tried to recreate Pumbaa from The Lion King from memory, but went insane halfway through. The design is very basic, but everything about it feels wrong. Like, physically, morally, religiously wrong. It's not quite the grossest thing on this list, but it's definitely something David Cronenberg has open in a private tab. Number 1. All of Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Zombie Island is a 1998 animated film featuring Scooby and the gang trying desperately to prove that ghosts are real. Because if they are, it means that there is such a thing as an afterlife, and that humans' brief lifespans on this cursed planet are not just cruel jokes perpetrated by an even crueler, yet ultimately empty and unfeeling universe. They don't outright say that, but it's heavily implied. Anyway, following a tip, the Scooby Gang travels to a New Orleans bayou island supposedly haunted by the ghost of a pirate captain. So the setup sounds like classic Scooby-Doo. In fact, before arriving on the island, the gang unmasks a bunch of other monsters who all turn out to be humans in disguise. So you just assume that they'll find more of the same on the island. But once there, things quickly turn kind of adult.
This just gets better and better, maybe from where you're standing.
There's a scene early on of a pirate corpse coming to life, which looks genuinely creepy thanks to the improved animation that lets you clearly make out the rotted flesh suddenly growing around a human skeleton. Then we learn that the island also used to house Confederate barracks, because the best movies force parents to hit pause and talk to their kids about the Civil War and slavery. Thank you, Scooby-Doo. More zombies eventually appear, and we're treated to a scene of Fred ripping off one of the zombies' heads, because in 1998, a PG rating goddamn meant something. That was when we were still a country. Finally, the movie reveals what's really going on, and it's more bonkers than anything you could ever imagine. Not only are all the zombies real, they aren't even the main threat. It's actually the rich owner of the island's plantation and her employee, both of whom turn out to be centuries-old cat demons. Hundreds of years ago, they were just innocent settlers living on the island and worshipping a pagan cat god, like everyone did back then. One day, pirates attacked and forced most of the island's inhabitants into the bayou, where they were immediately eaten by alligators. And that's when the young kids watching this movie ask their parents to tell them more about the Civil War to lighten the mood.
Thank you.
2 women survive and pray to their cat god for strength to defeat the pirates, transforming into killer furries and slaughtering their enemies. Since then, they've been luring people to the island and devouring their souls in order to stay alive. But hey, the good news is that souls exist, so there is such a thing as the afterlife. And the bad news is that the entire world has been worshiping the wrong god, and so nobody's going to heaven.
Disappointed!
Of course, this is still a Scooby-Doo film, so in the end, the life-draining ceremony fails and the werecats die by melting flesh first. Because this movie was originally envisioned as a cure for sleep for children, apparently. Maybe we should try this with other kids' franchises. Let's say Archie as a psychological sex and horror series. Wait, no, that's Riverdale.
You're home now, JJ.
Okay, Sabrina the Teenage Witch with a satanic sex theme.
I am the Dark Lord's sword!
Oh, they did that too. Popeye. Has anyone done a gritty Popeye yet? Man, you know who'd do a great Popeye? Chris Pratt. Thanks for watching this episode of CanonBall. Jump in the comments and let us know which of your favorite characters Chris Pratt should voice next.